Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the MP Sanders podcast. So today it's going to probably be a pretty short video because the video I'm reacting to is only 5 minutes long. But I'm going to make a response and reaction video to a video by Ken Ham, who is a pretty famous creationist, and his video is titled "The Best Proof for Creation." And of course, creationism is sort of this off branch of fundamentalism regarding Christianity, where they think the earth is around 6,000 years old. They think the Genesis story is literally true, particularly the first few chapters of it with the 7-day creation, Adam was made on the sixth day, etc., etc., etc. And so we're just going to analyze some of the claims he makes here. And he does go off into a field that I don't know anything about, which is biology. And so I try to be kind of careful with the claims I make there and just try to argue from just a really basic viewpoint of it instead of getting into anything technical. And this is something creationists do a lot of, or really any crazy conspiracy theorist, whether it's flat earth, creationism, whatever it may be. They shoot off into these super technical topics and make these very specific claims that not many people are educated or qualified enough to really comment on, and they hide in that sort of arena where they're making these crazy claims about DNA and things like that, where there's not that many DNA scientists that are qualified enough to say, look, this is where you got this wrong. And they just use that as a shield all the time. And another thing that they use as a shield, which is definitely going to come up here, is the argument from personal incredulity, which is saying, I don't understand how this works, therefore God did it. And once you kind of point that logical fallacy out, the creationist argument just falls apart at every corner, because that's the entire basis of their argument is, oh, well, science says this, but I don't understand how that could be the case, so therefore it's not the case and God is the case. So without going any further into that, let's go ahead and get started. Alrighty.
I want to divide this into two sections. First of all, when we read Romans 1:20, we're told this: for the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so they are without excuse. In other words, God's word tells us, if you don't believe in God, you're without excuse, because it's so obvious there's a God. God has made it evident to all that he is the creator. Where has he made it evident to all? Well, we can see it's evident to all just in the creation. You know that if you find an Indian arrowhead in a cave, archaeologists will immediately say, oh, intelligence has been here. They carved this Indian arrowhead. But then you point to DNA, which is the most complex information system, language system in the entire universe that makes up our chromosomes, our genes, all the information that builds a human or a dog or a cat or whatever, and secular scientists will say, oh, chance.
Okay, so this is just another really classic argument. Just the intelligent design argument. Usually they say, oh, if you find a watch, you can say that a human made the watch. And it's like, yeah, can you think why that would be? It's probably because we've seen someone make a watch before, man. And we have not seen any evidence that anything created DNA. And this argument that they say it's like secularists and atheists say chance, and they act like that's an unreasonable argument. Where else have you seen DNA in all of our time investigating the universe? Nowhere. So for looking at the chance, yeah, we got lucky because we've seen thousands of planets, we've seen thousands of stars, and we have not found any signs or evidence of life anywhere off of this planet. So the amount of life we have found lines up just perfectly and very well with the idea that we got lucky here. And it's not saying that it was all just random processes and chance. That's kind of a straw man. But even if we were saying that, it'd be like, well, yeah, that kind of lines up with what we've seen in the rest of the universe. And creationists like to say that atheists all say this is random. Evolution is not random at all. Random implies that there are no constraints, and if you're saying there's no constraints on evolution, then you just don't know what evolution is. The reason things evolve and change is because it is trying to evolve to be the most effective at staying alive and reproducing on the planet. That isn't random. That is a very clear constraint. Now, some of the mutations and how they form may be random, but how it's decided what sticks around is anything but random. And he uses, which is completely expected, that they use the Bible for evidence of their claims. And for some Christian claims, that's reasonable. Like if you're talking about the life of Jesus, it's like, yes, we had 4 or 5 different gospels talking about sort of the same thing. I know there's only 4 canonical gospels, but of course you have like the Gospel of Thomas, which talks about the things Jesus said more so than what he did. Like you have a lot of books written from around the same time, all talking about Jesus. However, if you're going to try to use the Bible as evidence to make claims like this, that falls really, really short. It's like, oh, well, the way we know that God exists is because it's obvious he created it. And it's like, okay, well, you've been trying to find evidence for this God for 2,000 years and you have not done it once. You have this sort of idea where you interpret certain happenings as evidence for God, but you have never found positive evidence. All you guys ever have is negative evidence. Positive evidence is direct proof of something. Like if you're talking about Parkinson's disease, for example, we have positive proof that that disease is caused by the destruction of dopaminergic neurons because we can see it, track it, take a picture of it, and explain it in data. Clear as day. That is positive evidence. Negative evidence is saying, oh, well, it's obvious. It's just here. How can you explain it besides God? That isn't evidence. That is just you talking about stuff without, incoherently, in my opinion. We'll keep going.
All evolved by natural processes. It doesn't make any sense. And in fact, DNA was first discovered in 1953 by Watson and Crick, 2 British scientists who were atheists, who said they wanted to prove to the world there was no God. And then they discovered the molecule of heredity, DNA. And
so one thing I do want to say is that you can't necessarily prove that there isn't a God. And so when I say I'm an atheist, it's not that I'm saying God certainly doesn't exist. It's that you theists have not found any evidence that God exists. It's that simple. It's not like a leap of faith that atheists are making, or at least my type of atheism is making. We're just saying, you guys have been talking about this for a few thousand years now, and every claim you make doesn't really hold up. You talk about the flood. It's like we know that hasn't happened since humans have been on this planet. So it's not like a leap of faith that, at least my sort of atheism, we're not making a leap of faith at all. We're saying, you guys have been talking about this and trying to prove it for 2,000 years, and you haven't been able to do it. And it's not because of dogmatic scientists keeping papers out of science magazines that prove the existence of God. It's just that your quality of evidence is poor, as we've already seen so far with this guy talking. And so another example of this just low quality evidence that they like to bring up and act as if it's the Rosetta Stone of creationism is rock dating. So they'll take an example like Mount St. Helens and say, oh, this volcano erupted 40, 50 years ago, whatever it was, and the rocks we date from the eruption say they're 300,000 years old. It's like, we know this dating's wrong because this rock is only, however old they want to claim it is. And it's like, well, just because the rock's solidified then, that doesn't mean that's what you're dating. You're probably using potassium-argon dating, which potassium decays into argon, and you can calculate, the half-life and however much was in there, and you can kind of get a range of dates established. The only thing that has to happen for this to work is that the rocks have to be a certain temperature to hold argon crystals, or potassium crystals. It has to be able to hold the substance in the rock without it melting or vaporizing or whatever from high temperatures. And if you look at the Mount St. Helens eruption, there wasn't a lot of magma, meaning there wasn't a whole lot of superheated rock that was liquefied. It was more of an explosion, where there was some magma, no doubt, but most of this, the rocks that they're dating were already cold beneath the ground, at least to some extent. Certainly cold enough to hold potassium and argon. So they're like, oh, we dated this and we know this is wrong. It's like, that's not what you're dating. The rock was just underneath another rock and then it got blown out onto the surface. That doesn't mean the rock was born when it got blown out of the surface. That's nonsense. And that's the type of evidence that they always bring up when having this conversation. So again, this is just an example of trying to say, look, it's not because us geologists are super dogmatic and don't want it in our papers. It's like, hey, we have a standard regarding the quality of evidence, and you guys consistently don't meet it. That's not our fault. If you want to prove something right, you have to follow the rules. And something else I've never been able to wrap my mind around is why Christians have to push the Bible into this realm. It's the most important, powerful, meaningful philosophical set of books that have ever been written in human history. For some reason, that isn't enough. It's not enough to have the most powerful, meaningful, long-lasting stories ever written to your name. You have to prove that they're scientifically true as well. And that just doesn't work, because the flood did not happen. There was no global flood since humans have been around. It just didn't happen. We would know, and I know that sounds like a know-it-all type of thing, but floods are one of the easiest things to spot in the geologic record. Like, here's some evidence that we can look at that you don't need a microscope, you don't need anything. You can just look at the landscape like you do here in Camas Prairie, and you can see ripple marks that are 50 feet tall and 300 feet wide, because there was massive flooding here 10 to 12,000 years ago. And then you can look at the channeled scablands in Washington, where the entire state looks like it's been carved up by flooding. Again, this was 10 plus thousand years ago where these happened. You can find floods in the geologic record very, very clearly. And if there was a worldwide flood that destroyed everything and killed everything that wasn't on an ark, one, we would see it in the genetic background of humans, because you can see genetic bottlenecks like you do with the genetic bottleneck 75,000 years ago, where the human population dropped down to like 20,000 people. Like, you can identify these things. And no, that was not caused by a flood. It was most likely caused by a volcano and some climate change from the volcano. So this is what I'm talking about, right? Like, you can't just accept the philosophical, metaphorical, psychological meaning of the Bible, and then you have to push it into the realm of geology and biology, and then you guys get upset when we're like, nothing about what you're saying makes sense, and it's just poor quality evidence. That's just how it goes right now. You guys need better evidence for the claims you're making, and you can already tell where this dude's going, where it's just, I don't understand this, therefore God. Scientists can't explain this, therefore God. Like, he already did it with the DNA thing. He was like, chance, that doesn't make any sense. It's like, well, yeah, it kind of does when you consider the fact that we are the only planet in all the planets we've looked at that has any sign of life. Those chances are pretty low, and we hit them, luckily. Let's get back to it.
Then they said, see, we can show you there's no God because life is just built on chemistry. But we found that DNA is not just chemistry. You know what DNA is? It's like a complex information system. You see, life is built on information. Do you know how much information there is in living systems on this planet? It's not billions, it's not trillions, it's actually zillions of bits of information. And you know what? You've got to have a language to read the information. Do you know DNA not only has an incredible amount of information in it, but it also has the information to make a language to read the information. If you're going to read a book and it's in Russian, you need to know the Russian code or language, or you can't read it. Well, DNA...
Okay, so we're getting back into logical fallacies here, right? So he's saying the word information over and over again, and yeah, DNA and RNA transfers information, but it's not necessarily in the way that we think about it. But again, I'm not a biologist, so I'm not going to go super deep into that, but I do have a chemistry and geoscience background. So whenever there's a chain reaction taking place, like there's an oxidizer that meets oxygen and hydrogen, and there's this massive explosion, was there a language that was needed to tell these molecules to explode? No, that is nonsense. And again, that's just low quality evidence for your claim. That just because DNA is complex, therefore God. It's like, there's a lot of things that are complex. Like the drug ibogaine, for example, is one of the most complex molecules in the world. No medicinal or synthetic chemist would have ever made that molecule by accident or anything like that in the lab. Yet here it is sitting in just a pretty nondescript tree in Africa. Was there some language involved in creating this drug and biosynthesizing these long processes that take place? You could say the same with THC. THC is not a very simple molecule. Are you going to say that there was a language involved in biosynthesizing this drug? But again, he harps on this thing that not many people are super educated on, which is DNA and this really complex claim about DNA. And since there aren't many people that can really get into the fine detail of that claim, he hides behind that and says, oh, well, see, you can't prove this wrong, therefore my argument's correct. It's like, no, your argument is nonsense, and I just don't happen to have the expertise to combat it with specifically what you're talking about. But you can use examples in the real world, like these biosynthetic reactions, like these chain reactions of explosions, and say, well, we don't need a language for these reactions to occur, so we probably don't need a language for these reactions to occur either. And he's bringing it back to this, like, human side where he's like, oh, well, if you read a book and it's in a different language, you have to translate it. It's like, well, why are you assuming there's a language at all? How about it's just really, really complex reactions, and DNA has ways of storing certain information so these reactions can take place, right? There's no language here. Now, I'm sure if you talk to a biologist, they'll be like, yeah, there's a language of biology in some abstract sense, but certainly not in the way that he is describing here. And let's continue.
Has to have a code to read it. You know what we know from science? Codes never come from matter by themselves. Matter can't produce a code.
Are you sure? Because DNA seems to have come from matter, and there seems to be a code in DNA. Just because you're assuming that God created it doesn't mean that's the case. And if we work on all the evidence we have right now, matter created DNA, there we go. Code created by matter.
It's impossible. In fact,
it's impossible while he's looking at it. It's just so funny, man.
Want that to be subject to random processes because it won't work. You have to put
okay, see, it would work if you just hit it with randomnicity for a ton of time. You will eventually get a code that does something. It's like the common phrase that if you gave a monkey a typewriter and gave him an infinite amount of time, eventually he's going to write something Shakespeare wrote, because he's going to hit every single possible combination on the keyboard if there's an infinite amount of time. And the same is true here. If you just slap a monkey on a keyboard and let him type out some code, given a really long time, he's going to write something that works eventually. And again, the whole "it's impossible" while literally looking at it and talking about it is one of the funniest things that I hear every single time I have this conversation with someone.
Into it to make the code work. And we also know that matter never produces information. We've never seen matter produce one bit of information.
Except for the topic you're talking about, DNA.
But there's zillions of bits of information in living things. And so
okay, so
obvious.
What are you talking about then?
DNA, it's shouting out to us. In the beginning, God created. There's no way DNA could come about by chance, random processes. But here's a point I want to make. Is that, in a sense, ultimate proof that God exists? Well, you have to say no, it's not. You see, we are finite beings, and we have finite information. We can't prove an absolute in regard to God. We can't do that because we don't have all information. The Bible tells us God has all information. We don't. That's why there always has to be a faith aspect. Without faith, it is impossible to please Him. For he who comes to God must believe He is, and He is a rewarder of those that seek Him. In other words, God reveals it to us. And that is ultimately the proof.
And see, I don't understand why you can't just stick with that. Like, what is so hard about not pushing your belief into the field, into different fields of science? Why can't you just say that, yeah, we can't actually prove this, but there's a lot of good stuff in the Bible. Like, there's a lot of good advice in the Bible. There's a lot of good philosophy and metaphors in the Bible, and we use that. And since the Bible is a library, you're going to have different genres. Like, you're going to have poems, you're going to have short stories, you're going to have some more fantastical fiction, and then you're going to have stuff that's more, at least can be reliably considered some form of historical documentation. And so you're going to have some things that are probably true in a sense. And I don't mean true in like the Jordan Peterson way. It's like there's probably some stories in the Bible that did literally happen, at least some details of those stories. But the earth was not created in 6 days, right? The earth is not 6,000 years old. There wasn't anybody during Old Testament times living to be 150 years old. Like, none of this happened. And so I don't understand why you can't just stop where you are now. with how you talk about religion. Just full stop. We can't prove this to be literally true, but I don't need to because it brings value to my life, and in that sense, it is true. No one would have anything to say about that. But you guys keep pushing into the field of geology and into the field of biology and into the field of chemistry. Why? You don't need to do that, and it does nothing but do a disservice to the incredible philosophy that Christianity is. The reason those stories have stuck around so long is because they're fucking amazing stories that are useful and meaningful to people and send messages through fiction that people relate to and can benefit from. Why is that not enough? Let's see what else he's got for us.
That's something that I can't prove to you, but God promises. If you search after him as you search after silver and gold, if you search after wisdom, if you search after knowledge, if you search after silver and gold, he'll reveal these things to us because he is the infinite creator God. We are finite created beings living in a created universe, and we know nothing compared to what God knows. And so, one of the things that we need to understand is that whatever position you have, it's a position of faith. Now, atheists who reject God, they have blind faith because their faith that life came about by natural processes doesn't work. It doesn't explain the evidence. But actually, science confirms.
Okay, no, you know what? Hey, that's a very fair argument. So whenever he said we were making a leap of faith, at first I was kind of like, I don't know about that. But I understand what he's saying because it is true that at this point in time, we do not have a super good definition or mechanism for how life first started. You know, there's some ideas that it was like amino acid chains in the ocean, and you had this spontaneous reaction where something ended up developing what we call life. And it truly may be that may be the right answer, but you know, it's not a very satisfying answer. And so I imagine that answer is going to evolve more and more over time. And so right now, sure, you can say there's a bit of faith involved, but what exactly is it faith in? Because if you say that you believe in God, you still have to have some sort of mechanism for him creating life on Earth, right? So even if you were to say that he snapped it into existence, it's like, okay, what happened when he snapped? If it was a spontaneous reaction between amino acids when he snapped, then you guys are kind of back to square one, because it's, well, we can actually explain how this would have happened without God snapping, right? So I don't think that it's faith in the way he's describing. If anything, it's sort of the absence of faith. It's like, look, we can explain it with this mechanism. It seems like it may add up. That's probably what happened, and we stop there. So it's not that we have faith that God doesn't exist. It's that you need to prove that God exists before we will put a lot of faith into it. See what else he's got for us.
Faith. Science of information, for instance, looking at DNA, biochemistry, confirms the Christian faith. So Christianity is a subjective faith, whereas atheism is a blind faith. So ultimately,
I don't know what he's trying to say.
Is his word, because faith comes by hearing, hearing by the word of God, and God has given us his word, and he promises that if we seek after him, he will reveal himself to us, which as a Christian, I can say that he has, and he opens our hearts and minds to the truth of his word and to the truth of the saving gospel. Hey, I get questions from so many people who are wondering, which is the best Bible translation?
Okay, well, I'm glad that your faith helps you, Ken Ham. Every time I watch one of these videos or engage with these people, I am left completely astounded at the lack of scientific literacy that is required to make these claims, right? And there is this idea that science is like a noun, and he said it like this a bunch of times. Well, what science actually tells us, it's science can be used as a noun, but the more appropriate way to use the word is to use it as a verb, right? It's the systemic investigation of the universe and the world, right? Like we have rules that we follow, there's a system in place, and we go down these boxes that we check off whenever we're trying to prove something is true. There is no one preventing you, Ken Ham, or you super spiritual or creationist people, there is no one preventing you from investigating your claims in that way. And I know that may put you in like a weird box that you don't want to be in. But at the end of the day, if you're going to talk to a scientist to make scientific claims about the existence of what you're talking about, then you have to prove it to be scientifically true. And if you don't want to do that, then stop talking about it scientifically. It's so simple, right? If you don't want to go through the steps of doing this like a scientist, doing this systemically, doing this with the scientific method, then stop talking about science. Just talk about your philosophical, metaphorical meaning you find in the religious or spiritual beliefs that you have. And again, this was just logical fallacy after logical fallacy. And the reason this is so common is because this person has not read an introductory scientific textbook of any subject in like 50 years, right? He has no idea how you actually prove something to be scientifically true clearly, because every time he tried, it was like, what are you talking about, right? So I'll make more videos like this in the future, and I hope that every time you guys see a video like Ken Ham or these flat earth people, that you just at least consider why geologists and scientists aren't fully on board with most of their claims. And then, as on top of that, you should understand that it's not because we're closed-minded dogmatists. It's because that we have specific systems and rules that we follow to prove things to be true, and the people talking about flat earths and creationism don't follow those rules. So thank you, and have a good one.